The Witcher 4 begins a new saga with Ciri taking over as the central monster hunter. That alone makes this one of the most important RPGs in development. Ciri is no longer simply the powerful young woman Geralt tried to protect. She has stepped onto the path herself, accepting contracts and dealing with creatures that are sometimes less dangerous than the people asking her to kill them. The cinematic reveal showed her investigating a village preparing to sacrifice a young woman to a monster. She studies the scene, drinks a potion, follows the creature into its territory, and uses both swordsmanship and magic during the hunt. The interesting part is how CD Projekt Red can build a full Witcher progression system around someone whose abilities were very different in the previous game. The studio's technology presentation also demonstrated dense forests, reactive crowds, dynamic weather, and Ciri traveling with her horse, although that demonstration wasn't final gameplay. Geralt's story cast a very long shadow, so changing protagonists carries real risk. But Ciri gives the series a familiar face without forcing it to repeat the same journey. This could feel like a genuine continuation rather than a simple reset. Archie-Age Chronicles is taking a world previously known for large-scale online systems and rebuilding it around faster, more direct action combat. The story returns to Aurora roughly 50 years after the original Archie-Age, during a period when settlers are exploring the continent and attempting to establish new lives. Instead of watching abilities activate from a traditional hotbar, players can dodge, block, chain attacks, and react to enemies in real time. Different weapons appear to offer noticeably different rhythms, from close-range blades to heavier attacks capable of breaking an opponent's defense. The game is still keeping several ideas associated with Archie-Age. Crafting and trade remain important, and goods can be transported using wagons and carts, while the journey itself introduces additional dangers. That matters because it suggests the world won't exist only as scenery between combat encounters. Gathering resources, producing equipment, moving valuable cargo, and exploring settlements should all feed into character growth. The biggest question is whether these different systems will feel connected or spread the game too thin. Still, an online fantasy RPG where fighting, crafting, and trading all contribute to the same adventure has plenty of potential. Mortal Shell 2 looks much less interested in patiently waiting for enemies to make the first move. The original game built its identity around possessing fallen warriors and using the hardened ability to turn your body into armor during combat. The sequel keeps the idea of discovering and inhabiting powerful shells, but expands it into a faster and more aggressive action RPG. 8 playable shells are planned, each carrying different natural strengths, learned abilities, and forgotten memories. Finding a new body therefore changes more than your appearance. It can open an entirely different way of fighting. Weapons also receive deeper upgrade paths, while executions give battles a more brutal finishing rhythm. One major change is the removal of a traditional stamina bar. That should let players remain active instead of constantly backing away to recover, although reckless attacks can still leave you exposed. Exploration now happens across a compact open world filled with branching paths, hostile fanatics, strange weapons, optional stories, upgrades, and additional shells. Bigger doesn't automatically mean better, but this sounds like cold symmetry is expanding the exact ideas that made the first game memorable. It could be a far more confident sequel. Ballad of Antara takes place across 2 connected versions of reality. One is the normal world, devastated by a mysterious, mist-like plague. The other is Para, a strange dimension filled with distorted environments, dangerous creatures, and the lost essences needed to repair what has been broken. Players control beings called emissaries, and each one functions as a distinct character rather than another costume for the same fighter. They have their own classes, combat abilities, and individual stories. That gives the game room to build encounters around very different styles. One emissary might stay close and overwhelm an enemy with heavy attacks, while another can create distance or rely on supernatural abilities. The enormous divine creatures are the real visual hook. Some fights appear to take place against enemies so large that simply reaching a vulnerable point becomes part of the challenge. The adventure also supports groups of up to 3 players, allowing friends to explore, fight bosses, and enter dungeons together. The obvious concern is that a long-running online structure could interfere with the strength of its single-player storytelling. But if the shifting worlds and varied emissaries receive enough depth, Ballad of Antara could become much more than another beautiful fantasy action RPG. Vindictus Defying Fate is returning to the setting of Nexon's long-running online game, but the combat has been rebuilt to feel heavier and more deliberate. Each playable character has a defined fighting style, weapon, and personality. Fiona enters battle with a sword and shield, letting her absorb pressure before answering with a counterattack. Lan fights with twin blades and relies on speed, repeated strikes, and careful positioning. Other characters bring oversized weapons, magical tools, and completely different methods of controlling a fight. What makes the system interesting is how physical the encounters look. Weapons slam into armor. Large enemies stumble when powerful attacks connect. Clothing, hair, and pieces of equipment react as characters move through battle. Bosses aren't merely large health bars either. Their attack patterns force players to read body movement, avoid sweeping blows, and choose the right moment to commit. The original Vindictus became known for flashy battles against huge monsters, and Defying Fate appears to be translating that spectacle into a more modern action RPG. It still needs enough enemy variety and exploration to support its combat over a full game. But the foundation already looks remarkably satisfying. Tides of Annihilation drops Arthurian legend into a modern London, shattered by an invasion from another world. You play as Gwendolyn, one of the survivors, traveling through ruined streets that now overlap with the mythical realm of Avalon. The central combat mechanic is her ability to summon spectral knights of the Round Table. These knights don't simply appear for one large special attack. They can fight beside Gwendolyn, extend her combos, defend her, and perform abilities based on their individual weapons. Players can configure multiple knights and switch between them during battle, turning each encounter into a coordinated performance between the heroine and her supernatural companions. Later footage also showed mirror combat, where Gwendolyn and a knight attack across two connected spaces at the same time. Outside ordinary battles, colossal knights tower over London and function as explorable vertical challenges before becoming enemies themselves. It's a spectacular idea, although this is also the first major project from Eclipse Glow Games, and the scale is enormous. If the studio can make its knight system feel as responsive as it looks, Tides of Annihilation could stand apart from the growing crowd of stylish action games. Abyss World is one of the more mysterious games here. It's a third-person action RPG set in a dark world filled with ruined settlements, enormous creatures, armored warriors, and environments that seem trapped between life and decay. The available footage places a heavy emphasis on close-range combat. Characters dodge through attacks, parry incoming blows, and use weapon skills to pressure enemies before they can recover. Several encounters show fights against creatures that are much larger than the player, including an elephant-like demon whose size forces constant movement around the battlefield. There also appear to be different playable combat styles, with swords, heavier weapons, and supernatural powers changing how aggressively you can approach a target. Visually, the game moves between decaying medieval architecture, open landscapes, and more surreal locations where the world appears to be breaking apart. Here's the thing. Abyss World was revealed with impressive footage, but detailed official explanations have remained limited. That makes it difficult to judge how large the adventure is or how its different systems fit together. For now, the atmosphere and boss combat are doing most of the work. This is promising, but it still has plenty left to prove. Mulan. The cursed sand replaces the usual heroic warrior with a resurrected skeleton, searching for the princess he failed to protect. The story takes place around the lost kingdom of Lulan, drawing from the ancient Silk Road and the archaeological discovery known as the Xiaohe Princess. You control a former royal guard who returns after death to find his homeland destroyed and his body transformed by sand. That curse becomes the foundation of the combat. In skeletal form, he uses brutal close-range strikes and heavy weapons to tear through enemies. In sand form, he becomes faster and more supernatural, creating projectiles, moving quickly across short distances, and even dissolving into a storm. Switching between these forms should let players respond to different threats without changing characters or returning to a menu. The perspective and combat are more compact than many games on this list, creating something closer to a focused mythological adventure than a giant open-world journey. Its smaller scale may actually work in its favor. A tragic personal goal, an unusual protagonist, and a combat system built around controlling sand give Lulan an identity that is immediately easy to understand. Onimusha. Way of the Sword brings Capcom's demon hunting series back with Miyamoto Musashi as its protagonist. He enters an Edo-era Kyoto corrupted by clouds of malice, where ordinary streets and temples have become hunting grounds for the demonic Genma. Musashi gains supernatural strength through the Oni Gauntlet, but the combat still focuses heavily on what he can do with the blade. Players can deflect attacks, repel enemies into environmental hazards, cut through groups, and absorb the souls released by defeated Genma. Precise timing can create powerful counters, while different weapons and techniques give Musashi options against faster enemies and heavily protected targets. The violence is intentionally exaggerated. Enemies can be stabbed, thrown, dismembered, and used against one another, making every successful counter feel dangerous rather than decorative. Capcom has said the goal isn't to make an impossibly punishing game, but to create sword fighting that feels satisfying for a wide range of players. That distinction is important. Onimusha doesn't need to imitate every modern action RPG. It needs supernatural horror, memorable enemies, and combat that makes every clean sword strike feel earned. So far, it appears to understand that perfectly. Project Windless is Krafton's attempt to transform the Korean fantasy novel The Bird That Drinks Tears into a major action RPG. The source material is known for a world that doesn't simply copy familiar European fantasy. It includes distinctive races, cultures, beliefs, and political conflicts created by author Lee Yongdo. That gives the developers an opportunity to build something visually different before combat even enters the picture. Early material has shown large landscapes, unusual creatures, and warriors moving through a world inspired by the novel's mythology. The project is being developed as a single-player experience, with a strong focus on narrative and cinematic action. However, confirmed gameplay information remains limited. So many important questions are still unanswered. We don't yet know how exploration will be structured, how many characters will be playable, or which parts of the enormous original story will be adapted. The advantage is that Krafton isn't starting with an empty fantasy setting. It has a respected work of Korean literature providing the foundation. The risk is translating that depth into a game without reducing it to attractive scenery and familiar combat. Project Windless could become one of the most culturally distinctive games here, but it remains an early promise rather than a complete picture. Valor Mortis comes from One More Level, the studio behind Ghost Runner, and turns the Souls-like formula into a first-person nightmare. You play as William, a soldier who served in Napoleon's army and awakens after death in an alternate 19th century Europe. Napoleon is still in power, war has consumed the continent, and a supernatural plague is transforming soldiers and civilians into grotesque creatures. Combat combines melee weapons, firearms, and unnatural abilities. A sword can parry an incoming strike, a pistol can interrupt an enemy from a distance, and powers can be chained into attacks when ordinary steel isn't enough. Because everything happens through the character's eyes, enemies feel uncomfortably close. You don't have the safety of watching your fighter from several meters away. A creature swinging from the side can disappear outside your vision, making spatial awareness as important as timing. The world also looks more diseased than ruined, with burning villages, deformed bodies, and military equipment twisted by the plague. First-person melee is extremely difficult to get right, especially when precision matters, but Ghost Runner already showed that this studio understands speed, movement, and immediate feedback. Valor Mortis could turn that experience into something slower, uglier, and much more oppressive. Chrono Odyssey is an online action RPG built around a power that allows players to manipulate time. The world of Cetera stretches from medieval settlements and forests to regions destroyed by events that haven't unfolded normally. Players can explore this seamless environment, enter dungeons, complete world quests, gather resources, craft equipment, and participate in large battles with other adventurers. 6 classes are planned, with weapons and abilities designed around active combat rather than passive ability rotations. The chronotector is what gives the game its real identity. Time manipulation can alter exploration and combat, allowing players to respond to attacks or interact with events in ways that ordinary movement cannot. During group battles, success also depends on positioning and coordination. A heavily armored player can hold an enemy's attention while others attack vulnerable areas or respond to mechanics unfolding across the arena. The first closed beta showed that the game still needed technical refinement, which isn't unusual for an MMORPG attempting this kind of visual scale. The real challenge will be making time manipulation a meaningful system rather than an occasional spectacle. If Chrono Studio can solve that, Citera could offer something genuinely different from another fantasy world filled with quest markers. Wuchi. The Wayfarer is inspired by the tale of John Wuchi, a classic Korean story about a powerful and mischievous magician. Rather than treating him as a traditional armored hero, the game presents Wuchi as a dosa or a mage of the way, traveling through a fantasy version of the Joseon era. The setting combines historical Korean architecture, clothing, landscapes, creatures, and music with supernatural folklore. That alone gives it a strong identity. The reveal trailer showed Wuchi confronting spirits, moving through rural environments, and facing a gigantic tiger-like creature. His magical abilities should be central to the action, although the developers haven't yet provided a detailed breakdown of the combat system. The original character is known for using supernatural powers to fight injustice, while also humiliating corrupt authority figures, so the game has room for humor and trickery alongside its darker monsters. Most fantasy action games are very serious about their suffering, curses, and dying kingdoms. Wuchi could feel different simply by embracing a hero whose intelligence and mischief matter as much as physical strength. The footage is still more of a promise than a full demonstration, but the Hosean fantasy setting already makes this one easy to remember. Beast of Reincarnation is the kind of game nobody expected from Game Freak. Instead of colorful creatures and turn-based battles, this is a post-apocalyptic action RPG set in Japan, thousands of years into the future. Emma is a warrior affected by a mysterious blight, traveling with a large dog named Ku through a land where nature, machines, and corrupted creatures have grown together. The combat combines real-time sword fighting with tactical commands. Emma can dodge, parry, and attack directly, building resources that allow Ku to unleash powerful bloom arts. Opening the command interface slows the action, giving players time to choose the dog's next ability without completely abandoning the pressure of the fight. That creates an interesting relationship, defending well as Emma prepares Ku's strongest attacks, so the companion isn't just following you around or dealing automatic damage. The pair also communicate without ordinary conversation, meaning their bond is supposed to develop through movement, reactions, and shared experiences. This is a major departure for Game Freak, but the connection between a human and a creature still feels strangely appropriate for the studio. The difference is that this partnership comes with swords, ruined cities, and monsters large enough to flatten both of them. Lords of the Fallen 2 is returning to a world divided between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. The previous game allowed players to cross into Umbral after dying, creating a second chance to survive while revealing paths, enemies, and secrets hidden from the ordinary world. The sequel keeps that two-realm identity but appears to be pushing the combat toward a faster and more violent style. The early footage shows heavy melee attacks, aggressive executions, enormous bosses, and environments built around religious horror. Players will once again face a kingdom collapsing under supernatural forces, where gods, monsters, and human factions are equally capable of making life miserable. The challenge is building on the last game without repeating its most divisive ideas. Umbral was fascinating, but spending too long there could become exhausting as enemies continue to appear and pressure the player. A sequel can refine that tension, making the second realm dangerous without turning every visit into a crowded endurance test. CI Games has described a world splitting at its core, so shifting between realities should remain more than a visual effect. If exploration and combat both take advantage of that division, Lords of the Fallen 2 could turn a strong concept into a much sharper experience. Fable is finally returning to Albion, and Playground Games isn't treating it like a simple graphical remake. This is a new beginning built around the question the series has always asked. What kind of hero do you actually want to become? Players can explore an open world, fight creatures with melee weapons and magic, buy property, form relationships, commit crimes, build a reputation, and watch communities respond to their behavior. Reputation isn't just a morality bar hidden inside a menu. Townspeople can recognize your actions, change their opinions, adjust how they interact with you, and react when your heroic image doesn't match what you do behind closed doors. Combat lets players combine sword attacks, ranged weapons, spells, and wonderfully ridiculous abilities like transforming enemies into chickens. That mixture of adventure and British comedy is essential. Fable works best when it lets you save a village, purchase half of it, marry someone who lives there, and then become hated because you raised the rent. Playground has already proven it can build beautiful open worlds. The harder task is making Albion feel personal, reactive, and funny. The latest gameplay suggests the studio understands that Fable is about living an extraordinary life, not merely completing an extraordinary quest. Project. The Perceiver is an open-world action game built around Chinese cultural and philosophical ideas. You control a character traveling through a world where different beliefs, identities, and versions of reality appear to collide. Combat uses fast sword strikes, deflections, evasive movement, and powerful techniques that can completely change the momentum of a duel. The most unusual system involves masks. Defeating important figures can allow the protagonist to take on new identities, gaining their abilities and approaching later encounters through a different fighting style. That means character progression may come from understanding and adopting the strengths of your opponents, rather than simply increasing numbers. The footage also shows large landscapes, ruined settlements, vertical movement, and battles that flow between grounded swordplay and more supernatural action. Its animations have drawn attention because fighters move with the speed and precision of choreographed martial arts without making every attack impossible to read. Paper Games and 17ZHE Studio have shown a visually impressive concept, but the structure of the open world remains unclear. The mass system is the part that could make everything click. Done properly, every major victory could expand not only what you can do, but who you can become. The Blood of Dawnwalker is a dark fantasy RPG from Rebel Wolves, a studio founded by developers who previously worked on games, including The Witcher 3. You play as Cohen, a young man living in 14th century Europe during a period of disease, violence, and supernatural terror. He becomes a Dawnwalker, human during the day and vampiric at night, after his family is taken by a group of vampires controlling the region. The transformation changes both combat and exploration. During daylight, Cohen relies on weapons, learned techniques, and human interaction. At night, he gains vampiric powers that allow him to move across rooftops, attack from unusual directions, manipulate enemies, and enter locations that might be unreachable during the day. Time is also a resource. Major actions advance the story's limited calendar, forcing players to decide which people to help, which leads to follow, and which opportunities to abandon. Thankfully, ordinary exploration doesn't constantly drain a ticking clock. The pressure comes from meaningful decisions, not from punishing curiosity. That structure could create a genuinely personal RPG, because completing one storyline may mean accepting that another problem continues without you. Saving everyone might simply be impossible. Phantom Blade Zero puts you in control of Soul, an assassin framed for the murder of his organization's leader, and left with only a limited amount of time to uncover the conspiracy. The game calls its style Kung Fu Punk, combining wuxia martial arts with dark fantasy, machinery, horror, and exaggerated weapon design. Its combat is built to look impossibly fast while remaining controllable. Soul can carry primary blades alongside secondary weapons that include cannons, spears, axes, and other strange tools. Enemy attacks require different answers. Some can be blocked, others reward a precisely timed parry, and the most dangerous strikes must be avoided completely. Respond correctly and Soul can trigger a ghost step, instantly repositioning behind the attacker and turning defense into another form of aggression. The animations are inspired by martial arts cinema, so fights flow through deflections, spinning attacks, sudden counters, and enemies changing direction halfway through a sequence. It looks spectacular, but the important part is that the spectacle appears connected to player input rather than playing itself. With its distinctive world, huge weapon variety, and combat that feels like a playable action film, Phantom Blade Zero may be the game every other stylish action RPG ends up being compared with.